على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. Okay. So, leaving off, we were talking about the athar, the effects of this message, these words that are being spit out of their mouth. So, when we think about the modern world that we're in, we already discussed the hadith mentioning some of the issues of the end of days, some of the things that we are seeing within ourselves. And we also talked about that there was an epistemic shift in terms of how people understood, let's just say, reality. Now, this epistemic shift, what it ends up doing is that it creates certain problems within the modern world that are specific to the modern world. So if you think about something like in the domain of economics, within economics you have the proliferation of capitalism. Now I'm not an anti-capitalist or anything like that, but I do understand that it has issues. One of the foundational issues that you find with capitalism is that it is based upon, rooted in riba. Okay? Now, before the advent of the modern world, people understood by and large that riba and interest-bearing transactions are problematic. Okay? Now, I'm not talking about just from the Muslim domain or the Muslim, Muslim scholars or something like that, or within the Muslim paradigm. I'm talking even outside of that. Christian scholars understood that. So you find a narration in the Bible where they had money changers, right? Jewish money changers. And generally, the description of Jesus in the Bible is not someone who's very mad, someone who's very angry. It's someone who's very soft, right? Someone who's very gentle, someone who's very welcoming. But at this particular juncture in the Bible, Jesus now sees these money changers, all right? And these things that they're changing, what they're really doing is they're telling people that Allah, or rather God, only accepts pure money. The money that you have is from the Romans. This is impure. If you want the pure money, we will sell it to you. Okay? So the money that will reach Allah, the sadaqah has to be pure money. We have pure money, we will sell it to you. Give us the Roman money, we will give you the shekels. You take the shekels and you donate it. Now when Jesus sees this, according to the Bible, this is the first time that it is described that he gets angry. He gets so angry that the narration mentions that he comes and he flips the table of the money changers, right? Of these Jewish money changers. And he basically tells them that you have made the house, in other words, the house of God, into a throne of snakes or something like this. Very angry. Which, by the way, a few verses later, it says that is when they plotted to kill him. Right? The point is that even within, the Christian sphere, interest-bearing transactions will look at that negatively. Plato, forget the Christian sphere. Preceding that, Plato had very staunch words against interest-bearing transactions. Because if you really think about interest, like a lot of times what happens is our discussions on interest are solely rooted in haram, halal. Can I buy the house? Is it haram, halal? Can I get a loan? Haram, halal. Is it riba or is it bay'ah? What is it? Da, 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 da. And so this, but let's take a step back just for a second. When you think about, I know this is going to sound a bit off. When you think about reality and that which is not real, all right? To put it in Islamic parlance, you have that which is haqq and that which is batil. Truth and falsehood is sometimes how it's presented. The concept of riba, the concept of interest-bearing transactions, falls in the category of batil, that which is not real. Why? Well, because when you think about how interest works, and I'll give you the example. I was talking to a few brothers the other day about Singer. You guys have the sewing machines? You guys have that here? Singer? So Singer he created his sewing machine very early on, and he was trying to go door to door to sell it. The problem that he faced was that at that time, no one could afford $500 for a sewing machine. So what he did was, he came up with this genius idea. He said, you know what, I'll sell it on credit. Not only that though, if it costs me 500, I can sell it for 800 with credit that's based in interest. Okay? So the first kind of early advent of credit-based sales comes from Singer. And so he starts selling these things. What eventually he realizes, and what most companies realize, is that they make more money on the financing than the product. Because with the product, you're only selling whatever you make as the profit. On the financing, if they're late, whatever it is, so even with car companies, they prefer, at least in the US, I don't know how it is here, they prefer that you get Toyota financing, Honda financing, right? They say that, you walk in, if you're going to buy the car on cash, don't tell them, because they won't give you the sweet, juicy deals, because they think you're going to finance it. Once they've already told you they're going to give you all these deals, and then you tell them you're going to pay cash, like, oh no, right? Why though? Because even with something like Toyota financing, the financing makes more money than the sale of the product itself. So people now are selling something that is not based in reality, because the product is what is real. The financing is just money upon money. You're not really selling anything of intrinsic value per se, right? So when it comes to even something like what I was saying, economic understanding, there was a shift, right? The modern world brings us into capitalism where everything is on credit. It's a credit-based economy globally, okay? So you have this shift that happens with the modern world in the realm of economics. You have the shift within, like I was mentioning, some of the issues that arise with transgenderism and so on and so forth, psychological issues. You have issues that arise when it comes to the society. One of the major issues that the United States faces is the decrease in marriage. They have this statistic that gets thrown around. It's been around for a long time. It says, in the United States, divorce is 50%. How many people have heard this statistic? Right? A lot of people. 50%. And then you have people coming now and say, it's actually like down to 30 now. And people are like, oh, really? Oh, they're becoming Muslim? No. That's not the case. I wish it was the case, but that's not the case. Anyone want to know why it's going down? It's not 30%, by the way. I just for hyperbole, I kind of threw it out there. But it is going down. Anyone want to know why divorce is going down? People aren't getting married, right? Great. So divorce rate is going down, but the problem is people aren't getting married. When people are not getting married, the familial structure is now broken down. So what you find now, and this started like, let's say in the 80s and 90s, you had the concept of latchkey kids. These kids would come home to a single parent. Or because of the financial situation in the United States, that what happens now is that after, let's say, World War I, the United States, as you may or may not know, enters into the war, and when it sends its soldiers off, who's left in the backdrop? The women, right? So the women enter the workforce. Now, when those soldiers come back, you have an excessive amount of workers. So now, as an employer, you're going to say, okay, before, and this is basic supply and demand for those of you who studied economics, before demand was high, supply was low. So you'd have to pay your workers a lot more. Once men come back in from war times, now supply is a lot, demand is low, you can pay people less. Correct? What also happens is that Americans are used to a certain standard of living. That standard of living, because they got used to it, because the economic situation after World War I was that the United States was able to supply Europe with all the goods. Europe is decimated, right? World War I, World War II. And so now, where are they getting their supplies from? The US. It becomes a major exporter. So now, they're exporting goods, the economy is great. But over time, more women enter the workforce. And again, the women are entering the workforce, the men have come back from war. So now, what you call what's known as, I'm forgetting the exact term, real wages. Real wages up to the 1970s are increasing. Real wages is that wage based on purchasing power. In other words, how much can a dollar buy you? Okay? They're increasing until the 1970s, and all of a sudden, they just flatline. And they've been flatline since the 1970s. Real wages have not increased since the 1970s in the United States. Now, The problem is that things are getting more expensive. So now, even if, let's say, a second partner doesn't want to go into the workforce, they have to go into the workforce to earn more. And if you still want to keep the standard of living, what do you do next if you don't have enough money? You borrow it, right? You borrow it. So now Americans, their debt-to-income ratio in the 1970s, very low. By the time you hit, let's say, 2012, you're looking at maybe 30, for every 30 cents, $1 of debt, which is insane, because you would never pay that back. So debt increases, right? So the financial situation, income inequality explodes, all right? All of these things happen by way of, because of modernity, by and large. We talked about interest. Now that's just on a financial side. We talked about psychological factors and so on and so forth. Now I don't have time to get into everything else. Just take my word for it, modernity sucks in certain ways, okay? And other ways, okay? Now, how did all of this arise? How did this shift in epistemology happen? This happens at a certain point in Europe during the Enlightenment, where you have, for instance, the wars of religion. The wars of religion, you're talking about 1530 to 1620. These are devastating wars that happen in Europe. That is a European phenomenon, where now there is a response to the concept of the church, and the church having absolute control on what we call truth claims. So the church, the institution of the church, is saying you have to believe this, you have to believe that, right? And there's excesses that the churches get into, right? The Catholic Church starts making a lot of money. All right, these wars of religion, they start to ensue, and so now people start to revolt against the institution of the church. But why did they revolt? What happened before these wars of religion? And this is where we go back to my thesis. Because what happens is, if you think about Isa alayhi salam, he comes with a message that is specifically for Bani Israel. And by the way, on a side note, and I think this may be a benefit to you, some people would ask, what was the purpose of sending the Prophet ﷺ? In other words, why is he the last and final messenger? We had messengers before, why can't we have messengers again? Good question. Because it has to do with what you may call historical teleology. In other words, that history, or that this project, or let's say the human project, has a divine purpose. There's a reason why we believe Adam alayhi salam and the Day of Judgment. There's a beginning and there's an end. And by the way, in many Western academic institutions, they say history has no teleology. There's no beginning and end, it's just random. Okay? But we believe in a firm teleology. We believe there was a beginning of the world and there will be an end of the world, right? Okay. In this particular human project, if you were to compare it to a child who's growing up, the human project, from the beginning, it starts with Adam alayhi salam. And Adam alayhi salam is given something very specific, right? وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ what? Asma kullaha. Adam is given from Allah asma, words, names. Why is that important? Why did Allah mention that? Because now He is distinguishing the human being from every other creature. Why? By way of language. Before you get to knowledge, there is knowledge, but cumulative knowledge only exists within the human project because of language. You can read history because of language. You can build on your science because of language. No other creature has technological progress or progress in the material world. Why? Because of language. So it starts with Adam alayhi salam, so there's a progression of the human project. You're learning as generations go by. But as generations go by, this human society is in infancy stages, in the beginning. So when a child is young, you give them rules, do's and don'ts generally, right? Halal, haram. We were actually talking about that in the podcast today. As a young child, you're not going to teach him, kalam, cosmological arguments about the existence of God, right? You're going to tell him, don't do this. He says, why? Because I'm your dad and I said so. Right? No, don't do that. I'm kidding. This is being recorded too. Anyways, my kids know I don't do that. Most of them. Anyways, so just like that, as a child, you give them do's and don'ts. If you think about early prophets that are coming to their communities, their message is basically Tawheed and some ethical teachings. And the quintessential idea of that is Musa alayhi salam, who comes with the 10 commandments. These are just rules and regulations. Why? Because the human collectively have not reached an intellectual, philosophical stage that they're ready. It is only at the point where after Isa alayhi salam and the sending of the Prophet sallam that humanity has matured philosophically, sociologically, and so on, to the point where the last and final messenger is sent. Because obviously Allah knows technological progress, one messenger, globalization, the internet, yada, 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 right? So each prophet is sent to his community for a specific wisdom in the course of this human project. Is that clear? Okay. So Isa alayhi salam, coming back to Isa alayhi salam, he's sent to Bani Israel. And he sent to Bani Israel for Bani Israel, right? Rasulam ila Bani Israel. As Allah says, he was a messenger sent to Bani Israel. The Bible mentions this too, right? I've only been sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Okay? So the message is specific. But guess what? About 2 or 3 generations later, this idea of the message being specific to Bani Israel changes. Who's the one that changes it? Paul changes it, right? Now he comes and says, look, now we can spread it to the Gentiles. The message has to be universal. But that's not the only change that Paul makes. What else does he make? Jesus is the Son of God, right? By and large, and there's a lot of nuances that I can't get into, but this shift starts to happen. So number 1, he says that the message is universal. We have to spread it out. Number 2, Paul and those that came after him start to say that, look, that Jesus is the Son of Allah. What was the major issue that the Prophet ﷺ is worried about? Oops, wrong way. Right here, right? They have no knowledge. About what? وَيُنذِرَ الَّذِينَ قَالُوا اتَّخَذَ اللَّهُ وَلَدًا. That Allah has taken a son. So now, Paul and those that followed him come with this idea that, okay, Allah has taken a son. So you come with this concept of the son, you come with the concept of the message is universalized, and you come with the concept that righteous actions do not impact anything. You don't have to do deeds. They're inconsequential. All you need is belief. Okay? And again, there's a whole backdrop to this. I can't really get into it because of time. But understand that these have ramifications on the Christian world. So eventually, when Constantine accepts Christianity and makes it widespread, their theology, what they believe, is not agreed upon. Right? So as I'm sure you know, 325, the Council of Constantinople, blah, 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 blah. They go into that. There's many councils that they had. But trying to figure out their theology, what eventually happens, so 300, you go to 500. In 500, the ruler at that time is Justinian. What happens is that the Trinity doesn't make any sense. Their concept of salvation doesn't make sense, right? The original sin, that Allah created everyone in an original sin. Okay, again, there's a whole philosophical problem with that. If Allah created everyone in a state of sin, right, how is that just? He starts you off in the red, not in the black, for those of you who know accounting, okay? Well, how is that just? Number 2, how does that match with the human reality? If you think about comparing the fitrah, that we're born in a state of goodness, versus the original sin, most people, they may not accept the fitrah, whatever it is, but all of their transactions in the world, how they operate in the world, is based on their fitrah. I'll give you an example. Most legal systems in the United States, not in the United States, in the world, transhistorically, meaning not just today, transhistorically have a central concept which is innocent until proven guilty. Even Islamic law, right? Al-yaqeen la yazulu bi-shak. Certainty is not removed by doubt. What are you certain about? You're certain that the person is good, pure, innocent, debt-free. From Islamic point of view, we have a theological basis for that. We say the fitrah. We know that theologically. If you take the original sin, everyone's born in a state of sin. Everyone's born in evil. So if you go by Christian theology, your legal system is in shambles, right? Because you start off in a state of sin. You're guilty until proven innocent, or being innocent by sending the son or whatever it is, right? So anyways, So you've got this problem of the Trinity. You've got the problem of the soteriology, the salvation concept. Doesn't make any sense. So philosophically, it's out. You have the problem of laws and actions. So the laws are basically imported from older Roman laws because there are no laws now. You can do whatever you want. Now, these discussions that are happening, people are discussing these things. How do we understand who Jesus is? The whole concept of Arius and that debate that he has with all of the other Christian theologians, this debate is happening among the masses. How do we understand who Jesus is? Is he the Son of God? Is he God? Is he, one of a Trinity? So these discussions are happening. Justinian, as an astute ruler, wants to put a stop to all of this. So one of the first things that he does, not one of the first things, but one of the things that he does, he says all philosophical discussions must come to an end. Any discussion of theology and philosophy is relegated to the church only. Number one. Anyone that's going to have these discussions, either you'll be executed or you'll be banished from the kingdom. And books speaking about philosophy, going back to Plato and Aristotle, this is from their perspective, kafir sciences, burn the books. So this book burning phenomenon, which actually, was imported into Spain as well, for those of you who know. But anyway, so books start to be burned. All of that material, where do you think it goes, by the way? It goes into the Muslim world. Because they say, okay, you don't want it, we'll take it. Right? So they start to translate it into Arabic. And that is why the Western world today even has access to Plato and Aristotle and whatever it might be. Right? Justinian puts an end to that. What happens is this allows, or this facilitates a type of tyrannical rule of the Christian church. Anything that the Pope says is halal, anything the Pope says is haram. Right? So he has the authority, he can forgive your sins, and so on and so forth. Eventually, you have what's known as the Protestant movement. Martin Luther now protests against some of the excesses of the Catholic Church. Among those protests was what the church was doing was they were selling what's known as indulgences. You could buy an insurance policy to Jannah. The Pope would forgive you, and you could buy it. Now, when you buy it, the church is getting rich. So Martin Luther now starts what's known as the Protestant movement. He basically hammers his whatever number of protests that he has, and that's why they're called Protestants, by the way, because of Martin Luther's protest. Hammers it onto a certain church in Germany, and the rest is history. Now, there were other movements like Martin Luther, but the reason why Martin Luther's movement actually took off, because he made use of a technology of that time. Does anyone know what it is? The Gutenberg printing press. Before that, anytime you wanted to you'd have to hand copy scripts. Now, because of the printing press, he could take his message out. So Protestantism, even though he wasn't the only one that was talking about it, his message is what goes out, and so you have the birth of the Protestant movement. It breaks up the church. So eventually, when we come back to the wars of religion, why did they happen? They happened because the institution of the church and all of its excesses, and it's moving away from Tawheed. In essence, what is it that the Prophet ﷺ is worried about? فَلَعَلَّكَ بَاخِعٌ نَفْسَكَ عَلَىٰ آثَارِهِمْ. The effects. The modern age, as we talk about it, we said in the beginning, ayah number 2, قَيِّمًا لِيُنذِرَ بَأْسًا شَدِيدٍ مِّن لَدُنْ. The after effects of war. What is modernity? If you think about it in the context of what happens after war, economically, what's going on in the West that we spoke about? Sociologically, what's going on in the West? Psychologically, what's going on in the West? Right? If you think about that, a lot of the after effects of war, ba'san shadid, you're seeing that as a product of modernity. But where does this modern project, where is its source? It comes from the excesses of Christianity itself. Okay? So, that was a very, very, very summarized version, because there's a lot that I didn't get into. There's a whole section on, certain ethics that Martin Luther kind of propounds or gets into, and the Catholic Church gets into, that I didn't get to talk about. Again, it was my thesis, so I could spend like days on this. But I need to stop here, all right? Hopefully the thesis makes some semblance of sense, and I'll stop here and I'll open up for our last, 8-9 minutes for Q&A. Is that fair? Yes? Or you can wake up now if you're... All right, so anyone have any questions? So usually, when people don't have questions, either it's very clear or it was not clear at all. Yes?
So, hence, with the thesis
Yeah.
that we are figuring out, and with the evidence that shows the root cause of all the haywire that happened is due to Christianity,
Right.
what can we do, or based on our capacity as a
Sure.
normal human?
How can we reverse it?
Should we reverse or how?
Yes, we should reverse it, obviously. We don't want to stay in this state, because I didn't get into things like environmental factors, right? If we are really khulafa upon this earth, then the environment's upside down. That's our responsibility. That's just one area. Economically, that's our responsibility, and so on and so on. So yeah, we should try to reverse it. But to know how to do that, you'll have to come tomorrow. Yeah, all right. Any other questions? That was an easy one. Jazakallah khair. Yeah. No, I said I don't usually refer to it. I don't quote it. And that's just my own, because, I've been in the field of da'wah to non-Muslims. I think I have about 20 years of experience. Qul mashallah ya jama. Say mashallah, people. All right. So, and what I realized is early on, I would study a lot of the Bible, right? I was in that Ahmadi Da'at phase. Allah yarhamu, may Allah have mercy upon him. So I would go to people and I'd be like, let me tell you about the Bible. But what I started to realize, a lot of people, like a lot of Christians themselves, haven't read the Bible. So it was just kind of just falling on deaf ears. The second thing I realized is that the biblical, and again, I'm not knocking someone that does this. That's fine if you use the Bible in your da'wah or whatever it might be. I just personally felt it just didn't have the efficacy. Because I started to imagine that if someone comes to me and starts attacking the Quran, I'm not going to take this person seriously, right? Similarly, if I go to a Christian and I am dictating what's in their book, immediately I've set up a certain barrier. Because I'm going to say, who are you to tell me what's in my book, right? So it almost becomes like an impediment by their ego, which says that I don't care what your interpretation is, right? And again, the interpretation, the problem with the Bible is that they don't have a set of distinct, what they call hermeneutics, or let's say principles of tafsir, usulu tafsir. They don't really have anything that's intrinsic to the text. So even among themselves, so if you come now with another tafsir, it's just one tafsir and another tafsir. And so, it's just, I remember, what was it? I think it was last year, I had a debate with an ex-Muslim who became a Christian. Thabiti Amwale, who was at the University of Houston. And obviously, so one of the things I do is that I don't bring the Bible into the discussion, because again, I don't find it helpful. But at the end, he was kind of almost prodding me on, right? So I kind of decided, all right, let's entertain this. But I still didn't use the Bible. So what I told him, I said, look, I'm going to, let's assume, for the sake of argument, the Bible is 100% preserved. For the sake of argument, okay? I said, you have a much bigger problem. And the problem isn't with the text of the Bible. It's with the problem of language. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that language is at the core, Adam alayhi salam is taught the names. Language for us becomes our strongest weapon, right? The miracle of the Quran is based in language, the philosophy of language, and so on and so forth. So I said, your problem is not in the text of the Bible, but it's in language. Why? Because if we go to Hebrew, the first Hebrew dictionary doesn't come up until the 10th century. Not 10 centuries after Musa, 10 centuries according to your text after Isa. And languages change over time. Even the Arabic language, that's why you have Ammiya, right? That's why you speak Shami and Masri and Daraja and all these other, But the difference is, when it comes to the Arabic language, is that we have a standard. Very early on, it wasn't just the Quran that was preserved, but it was the language that was preserved. And this is why we are the only people that can say, when it comes to Arabic, that there's a correct Arabic and an incorrect Arabic. You can't say that about other languages, because it might come off as racist, right? So someone who's, let's say, African American, who's been brought up in the hood, and you go to him as a white man, you say, look, your English is wrong, right? You can't say, what's up, son? That's not correct English. They say, well, who are you, right? I'll speak English the way I want to speak English. The point is communicative efficiency. And for us, and they have a whole grammar, by the way, like what's known as Black Standard English. There's a whole grammar to it. It's not like it's not sophisticated. It's just someone who's not exposed to it may not understand it. The point is, you can't say that there's a normative, correct way of speaking any language, because languages change over time. The problem with the Bible, again, I told him, I'll give it to you, it's been 100% preserved, is not in the text, it's in the fact that the language was not preserved. Your first your first Hebrew dictionary doesn't come up until the 10th century, and that too is only like 70 or 80 words. And it was in Arabic. And they didn't decide on the grammatical 3 triliteral root like they have in Arabic. They kept saying, should we copy the Arabs and get a triliteral root for Hebrew or not? That didn't get decided until much later. So your 80 words in the 10th century, which eventually becomes a dictionary, Muslims in the very first century have a dictionary, have a grammar, have nahu, have sarf, have balagha, have all of these sciences, because they understood it's not just preserving the Quran and the text of the Quran, it's preserving the language. And so your problem is not with the preservation of the text, even though they have that problem. It's in language. He was stuck. Like he had no way. He says, well, the Bible says you go off and you speak to them in languages. And I said, yeah, you understand how that's circular, right? Right? I mean, the Bible says, how do you know it says that? Right? How can you, So again, for the Bible, I don't really employ it in my da'wah. I focus on tawheed. And I think that's just a much better, it's like someone said that, if you tack the dirt in someone's hand, they're going to hold on to it tighter, right? But if you show them a diamond, eventually they'll let go of the dirt because they want to grab the diamond. You have the diamond of Islam, why attack the dirt?
Yep.
So anyway, it's a good question. It's a bit long-winded. Okay, yeah.
I want to ask.
Well, let me have him do it because you already asked one, so yeah, go ahead.
Where can we find your thesis on this?
It's not published yet. Because the thing is, when you write in academia, the language is very non-accessible, unfortunately, right? So I have to kind of make it a little more accessible. So inshallah, I plan to do it. Unfortunately, it'll probably be after my PhD. So it's going to be a little while. Yes, yes. These issues and the Palestine issue. In my research, I didn't really focus on the Palestine issue because at the time, it wasn't really an issue. So my answer is I don't know. Yeah, so Allahu A'lam. I don't know. Yeah, no problem. Yes. Yeah.
Any of the certainty and uncertainty that part.
How does psychological disabilities
Yeah.
relate to certainty and uncertainty? So with psychological disabilities, we have to understand that if we're talking about, let's say, the justice of Allah, right? Because this is where it would come up, right? You find that there's a hadith in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad. And the hadith mentions that there will be people who will be brought on the Day of Judgment. Perhaps you've heard this hadith, I don't know. But these people that Allah will send them a messenger on the Day of Judgment. And these people will see everything. So, they'll see the mountains crumbling, the seas on fire and everything else. A messenger will be sent to them. And if they follow the messenger, they will enter Jannah. If they reject the messenger, they'll enter the hellfire. So when the messenger comes, he says, follow me, he walks into fire. The people that follow him find that the fire doesn't burn them. They enter into Jannah. And the people that don't reject him, they enter the hellfire. Now, why am I bringing this up? One of the categories of the people is people who had mental disabilities in the dunya. So in other words, that Allah is maximally perfect in His justice. So it'd be like, that let's say they're not able to discern certainty and, rationality and things like that, but that doesn't take away from the justice of Allah. The other category of people in that are the people that came between the prophets. In other words, people that did not hear the message. So a lot of times people ask, like, hey, what about, this person didn't hear the message? Okay, but Allah is maximally perfect in His justice. So as far as people with mental disabilities, that's what I would say about that, related to like certainty and doubt. And Allah knows best. Do we have to stop here?
Any more questions?
I think we had one back there and then another one here.
Last
so
two. Last two.
Last two. So one and then two. Yeah. Oh,
Can you just give the gist of perhaps what's the significance of the first 10 and the last 10?
Okay.
And as well, for the sake of those who are not coming for the next 2 days, can you just give like one thing of practicality that we can come out in response or in protection against this?
Against the Dajjal or?
I mean this whole issue,
Right.
like, within the 10 verses, right?
Okay.
Perhaps there's something.
Okay, so as far as your first question relating the first and the last, I didn't focus on the last. So I don't know, right? I have to go back and kind of go through the entire surah. Maybe some things I can remember, but I'd rather not say it because I'm not sure, right? So first answer, I don't know, right? Second answer, can I give you a preview of tomorrow? That is also going to be a bit tough, but I will say, and I think I mentioned this last time when you came to the session, is that there's a section in there talking about why Islam is not a religion. And it's related to a lot of this, because the concept of religion, the conceptual domain of the word religion starts during the wars of religion. Because before 1530, the concept of religion didn't really exist, right? And this is why when you translate deen as religion, it's very problematic. And so tomorrow we're going to talk about what is deen and how is that different than religion, how is it similar to religion, and why many times it is a bad idea to say Islam is a religion, right? Conceptually, for the Muslims I'm talking about. So that's a little bit of a preview related to, inshallah, this.
So one more from the
One more we had, yes.
With due respect to
Yeah.
research works,
Yes.
as a matter of comparative studies,
Sure.
you brought up the subject of the Injil. Apart from the Injil,
Yeah.
have you done research on the Torah and the Zabur as well?
So my area of speciality is not, again, biblical studies, right? I mean, I study the philosophy of language, and that's kind of the domain that I kind of go into. Like I said, I don't really engage with the Bible. Number one, because I don't believe it's revelation, number one. And number two, again, my area is more of like philosophy of language. Comparative, even when you said comparative religion or comparative faiths, I look at it more from the aspect of theology. Only because if I was to say that the Bible says this is your theology, I'm not the person that should be saying that. Like if you believe in the Bible, you tell me what your theology is, and then we can compare which theology makes sense, which one doesn't, based on something we share, whether that's rationality, whether that's a pizza, whatever it is, right? So have I done extensive studies in the Torah, which I guess if you say that's the Old Testament, or the New Testament, to some extent, yes, but I wouldn't say that, I can quote you verses and things like that. That's not my main domain. I'm more looking at theology and philosophy and kind of engaging in those areas. So,
Because insofar as I know,
yes,
the Torah is the origin of the Jews, of the Israelite people,
sure,
from the days of Moses and so on.
sure, sure,
Right? And also Zabur, very much about Dawood and
sure,
Sulaiman.
right.
So this, do you have exposition on such books, which is written for the Jews and by the Jews?
So what I would say is that the Quran, because we testify that the Quran is the word of Allah, that it's stated in there that those books have been changed, they were not preserved. So for me to engage with what is said to be the Torah, or what is said to be the Zabur, right? What is said to be the Injil and things like that, yes, there was revelation that was given to the prophets. But remember I said that there's an entire teleology, human project. In the wisdom of Allah, those were for their specific times and specific places. There's no reason for them to be preserved because they were for specific times, specific places, right? So even when I'm quoting the Bible, I'm not saying it because I believe in the Bible or I believe in the veracity of the Bible. I'm saying it just as a matter of academic exercise, if that makes sense, right?
But I did read something along when I'm flying around in the Al-Azhar University.
It's Al-Azhar, okay, yeah,
And they confirmed that the Red Sea Scrolls,
right,
which is actually basically the Torah,
sure.
is still being preserved in its own original version.
So I think where I would agree is the Dead Sea Scrolls have been preserved. Where I would perhaps respectfully disagree is that, and that is the Torah, right? So that statement, we would need a lot more epistemic authority to make the claim. We'd have to compare it to something, right? So for the Muslim, we would say, okay, if the message matches the Quran, perhaps it is a remnant of the Torah. But even that, we wouldn't be able to say for sure, because based on how we understand preservation of text, we have a very robust system of how texts are preserved, right? Which we call tawatur narrations. I don't know, you may be familiar, but so the point is that it wouldn't fall in that category either. So that would be, I would say, an assertion or an assumption, which I would respectfully disagree with. But as far as the Dead Sea Scrolls, yeah, they may be preserved, they may be carbon dated, and this is really the distinction between what I would say is which has higher epistemic value, right? Is it a written tradition or an oral tradition? From the Islamic worldview, the oral tradition comes first and then the written tradition comes. And there are certain reasons why we say that the oral tradition is more certain of its preservation than a written tradition. And that has to do with a lot of different things. The Gutenberg printing press, scribes, and so on. It's another lecture in and of itself. So.
Okay.
But all right,
Thank you. Jazakumullah khairan. Thank you, Sheikh, for this very enlightening session of tonight. Alhamdulillah. So we have reached towards the end of this session. And just a quick one. You guys are most welcome to fill in this form that you guys received as a feedback forms. And then you can scan the QR code at the back there for you guys to have the information as to what IDT is all about and what are the programs that IDT has been doing. Okay? And inshallah, as a promotion, again, as what I begin towards this speech, inshallah, this weekend we have a program here that is called IDT Marathon. There's a 3 program that happens simultaneously, okay, at our center. And one of it is about Christianity, okay, 2 days program. And then there will be